Alright, purpose of today's video is to demonstrate three basic setup operations on the vertical mill. First one we're going to do is we're going to indicate a vise true to the ways of in this case it will be the x-axis, so it's running, the vise is true to the ways of the machine. The second thing we'll be doing, and to do that we'll be using a dial indicator to do that. The second thing we'll be doing is we'll be using edge finders to pick up the edge of a part and put the center line of our spindle over the edge of the part, and we'll be doing that in two axes, X and Y. And finally, what we'll be doing is we'll be using the dial indicator again to find the center line of a hole. So if you had to pick up a hole to do an operation or that sort of thing, or use it as a locating point to go to a next operation. So we're going to start today with putting the vise on the table of the machine. To do that, we're going to do two things first. We're going to use an Arkansas stone. We're going to stone the top of the table to make sure it's free of nicks and chips and all of that. And we'll do the same thing to the bottom of the vise, and then we'll set the vise carefully on the table and start to indicate it in. So here we go. And we'll do the same thing to the bottom of the vise. Now, two things: when you position the vise on the table, you want to have it as close to the middle of the table as possible, so you have as much travel in all directions as possible. The other thing we're going to do to try to speed up the process a little bit is we're going to line up by eye, by feel, the slots in these vices with these slots in the table. So I'm going to use my thumb as a kind of a feeler gauge, and I'm going to see how close I can get this vise to the ways of the machine without using an indicator. So, and if you're careful, you can usually do a pretty good job. Now we're going to slide the T-bolts into those slots, and on one side we're just going to finger tight. On the other side we're going to snug it down with a wrench. Not real tight, but just enough so it's going to act as a pivot point. Okay? So the vise will pivot around here as we check and in this case we always indicate the solid jaw of the vise. This jaw being movable, it can float around a little bit. So we'll load the dial indicator into the chuck, and there we go. There it is. Now if we get a little close-up on this indicator, you notice that this indicator has about 65 thousandths of travel. And, we'll go 15, 30, 45, 60, 67, 68 thousandths. So when we set this in, we're going to put the indicator on the pivot side of the vise, and we're going to set it to about the middle of travel, or about 30 thousandths. So that's what we're going to do here. Move it down. And lower the indicator down into the jaws of the vise, lock the spindle. Now, over on the side of the table, we have the Y-axis lock. And I'm going to lock it because this machine, and most of these machines, all have some measure of backlash, and I'll discuss that in a minute. This one probably has 30 or 40 thousandths of backlash. So we don't want this table moving back and forth. If you happen to bump into it, it could affect the accuracy of your setup. So now what I'm going to do is, after I've locked that Y-axis, I'm going to move, and I just snug it so it's not going to move easily. I'm going to move that in so I get my 30 thousandths. There's 15, 30 thousandths, and we're sitting right on 0. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move down to the other end of the vise and see how close I got it by eye, by feel. Looks like I did a pretty darn good job. So right now, from one side to the other, we got about 5 thousandths out of alignment. So I'm going to take a dead blow hammer, and I'm going to tap it on this side of the vise. Remember, our pivot point is here, so if I tap it here, it's going to make that vise jaw move one way or the other. So let's see if I get it moving in the right direction. I think I'm going to tap it here, and I am. I'm going to bring it to our 0, like so. Then I'm going to move it back down to the other end. Now, because our pivot point isn't exactly on the corner of the vise, it won't be perfect, but it'll be a lot closer. Maybe perfect. There's 0.5 thousandths. Not quite perfect. So we're out about 1 thousandths from one end to the other, which isn't bad. But if you think about it, that's in 6 inches. If you had a 12-inch long part, that would be 2 thousandths. And if you had a 1 thousandth tolerance, you'd be out of tolerance if you had to put one hole on each end. So we want to get it a little better than that. So let's tap it that way. Bring it to the 1. Alright, so now we'll reset the dial to 0 for make it easier to see, and we'll move down to the other end. Yeah, I might have gone the wrong way, and that happens. Alright, so now I got to bring it to the 2 on the other side, other way. There's 1. There's 2. And we'll reset to 0. See how we did. That's looking a little better. All right, so right now, I'm going to reset it there. Now these vices have some wear in the jaw from holding so many parts. So it might take you a couple tries to get it where you're happy with it. There's 0. All right, so and again, it's not a perfect science. A little bit of patience and you'll get there fairly quickly. And there we are. We got 0 on both ends. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten these T-nuts, and then we'll double check. Again, make sure that nothing has moved as a result of tightening them. Okay, so I've tightened them, and we'll double check it again. Just about sitting at 0. And after we get this where we want it, I'll give you a quick demonstration on backlash. All right, so we're within about 4/10. So for most day-to-day operations, that's a pretty good start. Now I'm going to put this in a little bit. Now remember, we've got about 30 thousandths of travel on this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this table by hand, pushing and pulling, to demonstrate how much play is in between the lead screw and the nut that moves the table. When you move in one direction, it's like this, and then when you move back the other way, so that play in there is called the backlash. So if we look at the indicator here, I'm going to move it. We've got probably at least 25 thousandths of backlash in there, and so you have to compensate for that, and that's why we've locked the table so that we don't inadvertently move the table while we're trying to indicate the vise in. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to load the part in the vise. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the edge finders. The purpose of edge finding is to put the center line of the spindle directly over the edge of the part, and we're going to do that in 2 axes. Now if you look at these edge finders, Most edge finders come in two variations, one with a 1/2 inch diameter tip and one with a 200 thousandths diameter tip. Today we'll be using the 200 thousandths diameter tip because it coincides well with the dials on our mill. If we go over here to look at the dial, you'll notice that these dials are graduated in thousandths, and one full revolution equals 200 thousandths. So when I pick up the edge, I always loosen this nut when I'm picking up the edge so that if this happens to be really tight, I don't inadvertently move the dial out of position. So when I pick up, then after I loosen this, I'm going to pick up the edge, and then I'm going to set the dial on 100 thousandths. Okay, just like that. Now what that's going to do is that when I move the 100 thousandths to 0, that's going to compensate for half the diameter of my tip, and it's going to put the center line of the spindle right over the edge of the part. So I'm going to loosen this so it's ready. I'm going to do the same thing in the y-axis here, because we're going to be doing this in both axes. Now there's my edge finder. I'm going to set the part on a couple of parallels to make sure the part is sitting in there accurately, and you want to make sure that the bottom of your vise jaw is clean. Set the parallels in like so, and set your part in. And we'll snug this up. Move it out of the way, and we'll tap it down using a dead blow hammer and make sure, because right now these parallels are loose. When we tap it down, the parallels are nice and tight. So we now know that our part is sitting nice and flat in the vise and it's held securely. So I'm going to load the edge finder into the spindle, like so. Now, we typically run these in high range around 700 RPM. If you run them too fast, this is just held in place with a little spring, and it can whip out and break the spring and send that thing flying across the room. So we're going to, in high range, and we're running about 750 RPM up here. Now, if you look at the tip here, you can see it's running out. And what we'll be doing is we'll be using the edge of the part to get it running true. And then what's going to happen is as we bring it in, it's going to kick out like that. When it does, and I'll show you what we do from there, but we'll be looking for that kick out. But to start, we want it wobbling like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down this end. I'm going to bring my edge finder over to the part. I'm going to lower the spindle so that we have a good amount of engagement on the tip of the edge finder. We don't want just the very end of it, so we're bumping out. So now, as we bring it in, we're going to be very patient, because it's real easy to go real quick and not get an accurate touch. So, but we have to be really patient, and you bring it in slowly, and you'll see it gets closer and closer, and it runs true. And then come over here, this side will be a little bit better to see. There you go. Now we're going to watch up here on this larger diameter for this to kick out. So and you'll see that in just a second. There, you see, now that's where we want to be. So now I'm going to set over here. I'm going to set my dial on 100 thousandths. Okay. But what I always do is I always double check myself. So I'm going to feed away. I'm going to kick it out, and I'm going to come back in. Now that I've set my dial, I'm going to double check and make sure I did a good job. And then patiently until it kicks out. And there we are. And we're sitting right on the 100 thousandths line. So I did a real good job picking that edge up. So now I'll raise the spindle up. And I'll go back here and I'll move this to 0. And we'll look at this, take a look at this. I'll put this so it's running true. And if we look, you'll see now that the edge of the part is in direct alignment with the center line of the spindle. You might get a better shot at it that way. So we can see that the center line of the spindle is right on that edge. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to move over. We're going to move in the y-axis now, and we'll kick it out again, lower that spindle. We've already loosened our dial. We're going to come in, we're going to be patient. kicks out again, like so. Now I'm going to set my dial on 100 thousandths again. Remember, we're compensating for half of that diameter of the edge finder. We'll kick it out, bring it back in, until it kicks out. Anytime now. You've got to be patient. It's a little key to accuracy on these. And there we go. And I'm right on the line for the 100 thousandths. So I did a good job on both of those. I raised the spindle. I'll bring this dial around to 0. And on this one I'm going to lock the table travel. And I'm going to go back over into my x-axis. Now, this is where backlash, it's important to understand backlash. Because I could go, and I'll get this running true, I could go back to where it looks like I'm on center, and I could put this on 0, right here. The problem is, I'm moving in the opposite direction of the way I picked up my edge. When I picked up my edge, I was moving my table in this direction. But when I went back to 0, I was moving the table in this direction. And you saw there's 30 or 40 thousandths of backlash in these screws. So now, I would be, because of backlash, I would be at least 30 thousandths out of true position. So what you do, you come over here, and because we know the approximate backlash, I'm going to go a full 100 thousandths past my 0, and then come back to my 0 in the same direction that I picked up the edge in. So now I've eliminated my backlash, and I'm going to lock it there. So right now, I know that my spindle is on this edge and on this edge. So we're right on the corner of that part, and we've picked that up nicely. Okay, so now with my dial set to 0, I can move from there to any position of any of these holes. Okay, now I could throw the indicator in there and move to the blueprint dimension and show you how good or bad one of the students was who put that hole in on location, but that's really not the purpose of what we want to do here. What we're going to do now is we're going to use the same dial indicator, and we're going to put it in, oh, there that goes, and we're going to put it in, and we're going to put it down inside the hole, and we're going to pivot until the indicator is reading 0 in all directions. Okay, but first what we want to do is we want to, hang on a second. We want to use a visual reference to get us somewhere close. So I'm going to use this edge finder again. All right, I'm going to get it running true, like so, and I'm just going to move by eye somewhere close to what appears to be close to the center of that hole. I'm going to visually look, and that looks reasonably close there. So now we'll see how well I did by eye. And we'll put the indicator in here again, and like so. Now, right now this machine is in gear, so it's a little hard to spin this. You get the resistance of the motor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in neutral, like so. And now that spindle spins freely. It's not engaged in the gearing at all. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this over here, and I'm going to bring the tip of the indicator down into the hole. All right. Now keeping in mind that we have 30 thousandths of travel, I'll set that on 0. I'm going to put this, again, I'm going to put this about in the middle of travel. So there's 15, and there's 30 right there. So now I'm on 0 in this axis. So as we come around here, see, I moved about 10 thousandths. Now we're going to go back the other way on the other side. And we are about 15 thousandths out, a little more than that, in the opposite direction. So now we're going to come back, just double check that. Actually, it's in the same direction. So, so now what we want to do is, since we know that the center line of the spindle is relatively close in the x-axis, but it's about 10 thousandths out in the y, I'm going to move that y-axis to the 10 there, and then I'll reset the 0 just for visual reference. You don't have to do that, but sometimes it's less confusing. So now I know I'm on 0 there. I'm going to pivot the spindle here, and now I'm at 1/1000. We'll go back 180 from there. We're at 0 in the Y, and we're a few thousandths out that way. So now we are approximately 3/1000 in that direction, and about 1 there. So we're about 4/1000 out of location. So I'm going to come back to the, I'm going to move it 2/1000. And again, I'm going to re-zero it, like so. And then we're going to pivot the spindle. We're at +1, and we're back to 0, well, a little bit less than 0. All right, so we're going to go to 0 here in this axis, like so. And then we'll check it in 2 directions here. I am 0 there, and I'm about 1/1000 there. So now I'm going to come back and I'm going to put that on the 1/2,000 mark, and hopefully I go in the right direction, like so. Reset the 0. All right, so then we're on 0 there. A couple tenths there, and a couple tenths there. Well, actually, we're right on 0. So we're at 0, 0, and a couple tenths. So now if I bring this to the 0, went too far. So now I'm on the 0 there. And so if we pivot that, I'm on 0, 0, and 0. Yeah, a couple tenths off. Now, you might be thinking, why don't I check the 4th axis? And that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to bring it to the back side. But the reality is, if that hole's round, which it should be, that 4th position should be right on 0 as well. So I'm going to put that on here, come around to the back of the machine, and lo and behold, it's within 5/10. So right now, we've picked up that hole within 5/10. Now, that may or may not be good enough for your tolerance on your blueprint, but for our purposes here, that gives you a real good idea on how to pick up a hole. It would take a few more minutes to get that perfect, and I'm not sure that that's what we're trying to demonstrate here. But so you get the idea. It's not too difficult, not too hard. It doesn't take too much time if you pay attention. So so that's it. You saw how to tram a vise in. You saw how to pick up that 2 edges using the edge finders, and you've seen how to pick up a hole location using the dial indicator. All right, so that's it for now. I hope this helps you when you're looking at my class, because we'll be going over this in class, but you may not get a real good visual during class. Done.